At a very good, friendly beekeeper's place. Happens to have lots of swarms. There's actually there's two swarms in this tree. One down here, one up there. And while that's happening, me and beekeeper were hanging out, and this one took off. We just started watching bees just crawl off the face, and lots of bees in the air, and there's a certain sound that you hear. I mean, lots of thousands of bees in the air. So I had my handy dandy phone with me, so I went up there and just took a picture of it. You can see we're walking up the front. They kind of fly around. Somewhere in there eventually is your queen, and she's going to land much like the two in the tree. She's going to land somewhere typically nearby, and they're going to form a cluster effectively, but they're going to form a swarm on something and send out scouts looking for a permanent place to go. Meanwhile, back in the hive, the young are still there. Hopefully, very hopefully, either brand new queens or unhatched queen cells are there too, so the mother hive is going to be fine. But that's an amazing sight. You just look up and there's bees. There are bees everywhere. It's a kind of a magical thing. Anyhow, we've kind of moved from this over into content for today. While we're doing that, go ahead and switch them while Jason's moving us around. If you guys have any questions from what you've read so far for this week, or questions you want us to answer, or before we get into wrapping up last week and starting this week's content. Nope. We're ready to go then.
All right, so how to work your bees. You're going to want to do a little prep before you actually go out there and open up your hive. So you're going to grab your veil, your smoker, your various tools, and carry them out there with you. You're going to want to light your smoker and have it going. I don't mean just get it lighted and then open up the hive. I mean light it and make sure that you give it some good puffs, really get that fuel burning in there and stuff, because I know so many beekeepers starting out that they'll get that lit and then they'll set it down, and then they get the hive cracked open, they go to grab their smoker and they go to puff, nothing comes out of it because it basically put itself out. So work the bellows for a while and get it really boiling over and stuff, so you don't have that happen to you there. One of the things you need to consider when you're going to go work your hives is the conditions. Is it too cool outside? Do you have rainy weather coming in? Even cloudy days. Those are stressors on the bees that's going to make your checking the hive just pleasant or unpleasant. Dark colored clothes are a stressor for the bees. Hair, carbon dioxide, being queenless, different things like that are all stressors on the bees. So when you're going out there, just pay attention to some of those things to make your hive inspection be a little more pleasant for you. So when we get to the hive here, you should take your smoker, which is somewhere around here.
Yeah, I don't know where it is. It's here somewhere.
Whatever. You'll take your smoker and you'll give a few puffs right down there at the entrance of your hive. As you're lifting up your top cover here, it should come off nice and easily. You would then take your smoker and puff that entrance that's right there in the hive cover before you'd ever start taking your hive tool to crack this open. Confident, deliberate movements. Don't block the front of the hive. Anybody have a guess why you don't block the front of the hive? Dead silence. Well, the front of the hive is where the bees are all flying in and out of and stuff. So anytime you step in front of the hive, if you're there for like 5 minutes and you turn around, there's going to be a big ball of bees just fluttering in the air right behind you because they can't get in the hive. Also, the bees coming out of the hive are banging right into you, and if your entrance is anywhere near like the ground there, the cuff of your pants down here becomes prime target for the bees sitting on your pants, going up your pant legs, things like that. So just standing in front of your hive just creates some problems for you. So it's better if you stand to the side of your hive like this. Use less smoke than you need. I don't know. I say use however much smoke you want in the spring and the summertime. You're not extracting your honey. You're not worried about that. But as you're working the bees here, you're pulling frames out. You're doing whatever you want. You're getting down into your boxes. But if you ever see a time of the day when the bees start lining up on the frames and just staring at you, they're not running around anymore, but it looks like 40 or 50 of them are just looking at you. That's about the time you should give them a few puffs of smoke. The next step from there is the bees are agitated enough they come after you, so just pay attention to them staring at you. If a number of bees just start plinking against the veil that you're wearing, that's another indicator that, hey, enough of that smoke scent has dissipated, and they're starting to do a little bit of alarm pheromone chemicals in there, telling other bees, people are picking on us. That's another time you should go ahead and smoke them a little bit more. Yeah?
Can too much smoke harm them or anything?
No. The only way your smoke is actually going to harm them is if you get that smoker just really puffed up a whole bunch with a whole bunch of hot coals in there. At some point there, as you're pumping, instead of smoke coming out, the smoke goes away and you're actually just blowing hot air and flames out of the bellows. So the moment the smoke goes away, know that's what's happening. It's not that it went out. You're actually using it as a flamethrower, and that can be bad at that point.
We're also assuming you're burning something that's, you're not burning paint chips or something like that in your smoker. Something nice, a clean fuel, something that's, there's no plastic or anything in there. Just smoke is all you want.
Yes, Mike.
I've heard some people say that you can over-smoke these and end up causing yourself queen issues. Is that for you?
I have never heard of smoke causing queen issues.
Okay.
The only time I hear people complaining about too much smoke is when it's honey harvest time and they over-smoke their honey supers, and then they get a smoky flavor to their honey then at that point. Some people actually find it desirable to smoke honey, but there's a difference between accidentally doing it some and you put an off flavor to your honey, and then purposely putting it in a smoker and giving it like hickory chips flavoring to the honey, as opposed to maybe having blue jeans in your smoker that you're pumping out those smoke fumes on it, or just taking regular leaves out of the yard or dried grass or something like that. I don't know about you guys, but I like a brisket that has a hickory flavor to it and not a smoked grass flavor to it, but that's what you're basically doing to your honey. Let's see here. Lift frames slowly and fluidly. In another class, I talked about having proper bee protection on, making you more confident as a beekeeper, and wear whatever you think is most appropriate. This is where that comes into play. If you're working the bees and you're comfortable, you can pull that out and look at it. Everything's smooth and ginger with your movements. But if you're nervous, if you're worried about what you're doing, you start fumbling with this and you get it out here and you think, oh, I need to do this or that, and you drop the frame, and the next thing you know, you've really upset the bees, or your fingers just slipped on this frame or something, and you tap it down, and that's what it's talking about, having slow, fluid movements. If you're confident, you're just pulling the frames out, you look at it, okay, that's good. Pull the next one out, yep. Doing your inspections like that, you'll have a lot better time. It says be brief in the hive but not hurried. Basically they're saying just don't be in the hive for half an hour type of thing. Get in there, do what you need to do, put it back together. All right, I kind of went over this stuff without the slide being up, but using your smoker. Why? Well, in another class I already discussed that the smoker cuts down the ability of the bees to communicate through pheromone scent. The only thing the bees can really smell is that smoky scent throughout their hive there. And 80 to 90% of bee communication, especially bee communication revolving around, hey, we're under attack, hey, something bad is happening to our hive, all happens through pheromone scents. The smoker just silences all the bees. It does supposedly trigger a feeding ritual of the bees. In case there was a forest fire, the bees tend to engorge themselves on honey, but when that fire doesn't come and stuff, they put the honey back in the frames there. So it kind of keeps them busy otherwise that way. What to burn? Anything that doesn't have, anything that's not got a lot of printed chemicals on it. So like color magazines, not a good choice because of all the printed color on it. I know people that use old blue jeans. I know people that buy smoker pellets for actually smoking meats and use that. I know people that just go out and they grab up any dry material in their yard and they'll put it in there. Different people that do woodworking, they use wood chips. One of the easiest, cheapest things you can get your hands on, go to the pet store and those big chunky cedar wood chips that you can buy for hamster bedding, not the really fine stuff. That'll just plug up your smoker and be really hard to keep going because the airflow isn't there. But get really big chunky wood chips for hamster bedding. It'll cost you like $3.50 for a bag that'll last you the next 3 years, okay? And that stuff will just burn beautifully in your smoker.
I think the book mentioned pine straw was the phrase it used, which I don't even know for sure what that means.
It's a southern
Pine needles?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I thought it was needles, okay.
Yeah, you can do that. I don't know. None of my bee yards seem to be around pine trees and stuff, so I never seem to have that available, but I have been in pinch situations where I had no normal fuel brought with me and I just was pulling a whole bunch of dried grass and putting in there. One cool trick that actually will keep you away from that flamethrower situation I was talking about, once you get your smoker lit and everything, get it nice, get nice hot coals in there, pop the top open, grab a fistful of green wet grass, smash it in the top and close it back up. The air that you're pumping in the bottom of the smoker will keep all of the coals going and everything, but the smoke or any flames will pass right through that grass and cool it right back down. All right, how often should you do your inspections? It's suggesting on the slide to do it every 10 days for your first year. Again, we talked that if you want to get in your hive every couple of days as you're learning, go for it. The downside to getting in your hive too often is every day you just disturb them, you're cutting down on a lot of their productivity because they're, I don't know, once you open that hive up for the rest of the day, they don't do a very good job of foraging or maintenance or anything else. They're just kind of disrupted for that day. But you do need to, if you don't know your nectar flows and you don't know, you're just getting used to this stuff, you do have to get in there often enough that you'll notice when your box is filling up, when you're getting to that 7-10 point to put the next box on. You will need to get in there and see how your queen is laying and things like that. So get in there often enough so that you can learn how to actually beekeep. What should you look for each time? Well, when you get into the hive and you get down into the brood chamber there, you should find eggs. If you've got eggs, you know you have a laying queen. You don't necessarily have to find your queen as long as you have beautifully laid eggs in the center of the cells. If you don't find any eggs and you just find larvae, look around a little bit longer. You might find queen cells, or you'll find another frame that does have eggs on it. You'll want to check for how nice the brood pattern is on those frames. It should just look like a ever-expanding circle. So like if you pull a frame out, it should have like some capped brood in the center, some really fat exposed brood, some smaller broods, some eggs, some honey, etc. like that, and that's sort of a pattern. Now if you pull a frame out and 100% of it is all capped brood, well you just have an amazing queen that did a great job of filling that frame up and they've just moved on. But you'll find frames that are in stages of her laying on it and then developing out. Symptoms of pests, parasites, and diseases. Typically, if you see frames that you don't have good laying happening, that is your first indicator that you either have disease, parasites, or something else going on. If you happen to literally see the signs of wax moth or hive beetle damage in your hive, you definitely have disease and parasites going on. Those are the vultures that move in when you have a lot of other problems already happening. You'll want to see if there's signs of overcrowding. If all of your frames are completely packed and you have bees boiling out the front of your hive and you see some swarm cells in there, it's overcrowded. You should have gotten a box on there sooner. Indications of food, quantity of supply and stuff. That'll get a little bit later when we're getting into the honey chapter here. That'll make more sense. All right. Care of your new colony boils down to feeding, adding equipment, and is a queen right. Feeding is early spring. Adding equipment is as the nectar flow comes on, you need to keep up with it. And you always want to make sure your hive is queen right. If it's not queen right, the size of your hive is not going to grow. It's just going to go downhill. Even if they're making their own queen and stuff like that, you have to then think in your head, all right, they're just building queen cells. It's going to be X number of days before she hatches, X number of days before she can start laying, and this has put me behind like 3 weeks now for the growth of my hive. And we've covered the 710 a little before. All right, when you're doing your inspection, you should see those beautiful little grains of rice in the bottom of the cells there. That is nicely laid eggs in those cells. If you see 5 or 6 or 15 in one cell and they're on the sides of the cell instead of down on the bottom, you probably have a laying worker. That means your hive has gone queenless at some point. They didn't make a queen and one of the workers is now taking over the role of queen, but she doesn't have a fully functioning reproductive system, so she's laying all drones. Young, newly laying queens, they'll sometimes get confused and lay 2-3 eggs in a single cell, but again, it's going to be on the bottom of the cell, not on the sides. Something to look for. You can see here, this queen kind of laid some beautiful eggs, but it's right next to larva that was several days older and stuff there, and then capped brood. So you've got kind of a gap here in ages, as opposed to a nice transition. Here is a beautiful Italian queen right there. And you can see the frame there that they're building the wax out on. That's the progression that they do there. The cells up here are deep enough the queen could lay in. These are partially finished out, and this is your foundation that hasn't been worked on yet here. But that's what you should see this spring as you're working your bees, is them bringing in the nectar and filling out these frames like that. This is sort of that football shape there where this is all capped brood. There's another slide coming up here that's a little bit better for seeing some of the stuff on it. This is probably on the outside of the hive here, the outer portions of it, because as they're building the wax here on the deep frames, they're filling it all with honey, and they'll predominantly do that on those outer frames. The frames on the inside, they'll still do a little band of honey, but there's no eggs or anything on that frame there. That's the little band of honey that I was talking about that they'll do. And that is a gorgeous frame of capped brood there. You can see a little bit of pollen here and here. It's not in focus enough, but I know there's little bits of larva here. I can see some lightness there, and on my laptop I can see that there's some larva there, but that is just gorgeous. That's what you want to see. Every one of these will just look like a little raised dome on those cells. If you There's a frame slide coming up here, but that's again honey being deposited on there, and there's a little bit of brood going on down here. That is a problem frame. So instead of that beautiful frame of nice cells, you instead have some that are super, the shadow here is pointing to the ones I'm talking about. This one, this one, this one are raised way up. This one and this one are flatter like what was for the normal brood. There's a little bit of normal brood there. There's some others like right here, you can really see that they're raised up. What you're having here is a combination of drone and worker brood being laid on the same frame, and all this open space here combined with those two sexes being laid intermittently means you have a very poorly mated queen. Or a queen, this could happen on a frame that's 3 years down the road. You could have a queen that's failing you because she's just running out of reproductive material, been damaged or whatever. But when you see something like this in your hive, you need to replace your queen. This is a bad deal going on here. They should already be trying to replace their queen on their own, but so good frame, bad frame, obviously. All right, this is what you are going to see a ton of this spring here. So you get your packages here in April, and right around the same time, your dandelions are going to start blooming there. So most packages are coming mid-April to late April. Your dandelions are blooming. And dandelions just put on tons and tons of that golden pollen into your hives. There's, of course, other blooming stuff in the environment that's going to give you pollen baskets, but they will just be a mass army coming back to the hive when those dandelions are going on. That's just a picture of a bee drinking some water. Bees do need to collect water in the summertime. They use it not only for drinking purposes, but for air conditioning in the hive. So bees like their hive to be around 92, 93 degrees inside, but if you have a 100-degree day with the sun beating down on your hive there, the bees have to start, they'll go to the entrance of the hive, they'll start fanning their wings, and on the frames there will be bees also fanning their wings, and they literally suck air in the hive, force it up one hot side of the hive, down the other side of the hive, and blow it out the other half of your entrance. That's part of the reason why after you get past spring and your hive starts growing, you pull your entrance reducer off so they have the full use of that entrance there and can regulate the temperature in your hive better. But coupled with that, bees will go drink water. And on those super hot days where just fanning their wings isn't working enough, you know how in cattle barns they've got those mister fans? Well, bees will literally release little droplets of water from their mouth while they're fanning their wings to try to air condition the hives more than what just the pushing the air through there will do. So if you don't have a water source nearby, like a pond, a creek, something of that nature, the bees are going to go to the first thing they can find. So if you're living inside the city, that might be your neighbor's swimming pool, you know, even if it's a kiddie pool outside. It could be the bird bath like this here. It could be a pet's water bowl or something like that. So something to think about if you're inside of city limits is, if you don't want to become a pest to your neighbors in a waterless situation, put your own bird bath out in the yard there. Put some little stones in the bird bath so the bees can land on the stones and go down to the water's edge and drink and not drown and stuff like that. Just something you can be proactive with when summertime starts getting really dry, especially if you ever had a drought for a while where your yard gets those cracks in it that you can put your hand down in the cracks. You really need to supply them with water at those times. Cool. Buzz through those photos and we're on to management for honey and pollen.
We did good. Any more questions?
Yeah, kind of went through that quick. Did I miss any stuff for you?
I've got a recommendation, especially when you're in your first year of beekeeping. Find a way to take notes, right? Whenever you inspect your hive, have a way to document what you've seen, and so you can keep track of, okay, you know, maybe at this inspection, you bought a package and you're a month into it, and they had maybe drawn out 3 or 4 frames. and then you know, okay, that's where they were. So when you come back in the next 10 to 14 days, they should have progressed past that, and you can kind of track, right? You can kind of track what the progress looks like. Very helpful. Eventually, you'll get to the point where, okay, they're close to my 7-10 rule. Maybe they're at 6 frames. So by the time you come back, they're going to be into that 7th or even 8th frame. So when you come back, you maybe should bring your second box with you and be ready to put that on. I find it really helpful to kind of keep track of what my hives are doing and what I would expect to do next time I go to visit that hive.
Something that a few beekeepers I know do, they will go out to their bee yards and they always carry one of those carpenter's crayon pencils with them. And they'll literally just mark notes on the top of their hive box just to remind them what's happening in the different hives. Now, obviously, if you have 200 colonies, you're not doing that. But if you have 5 hives, you can leave little notes on each of the hives that you want. It won't look pretty, and if you have a steel cover, you can't do it on the hive, but you can certainly mark down the boxes. And those wax pencils aren't going to harm the hive in any way. And in future years, you have to repaint the hive anyhow, so you can always come out there and slap a little bit on there. Fall time. You're going to have some days that are in the 40s and 50s. That's just fine for paint, but it's cool enough it'll keep the bees in there. So you can literally have the bees in the hive and you just go out there and slap some paint on there to cover up any of your ugly markings. Or if you notice the paint coming off on your corners, those are really important. You could come out there even with the hive active and go ahead and put some paint back on those corners to give your boxes some longevity.
Cool.
Yes?
One thing I just read in the book the other day that surprised me a little bit, I hadn't picked up on it before, that in the winter, the bees actually go into the cells of the comb, like they go in head first. I showed a picture of them in the book. Where is that? I mean, you're showing these pictures of the frames where you got the brood with a little bit of honey around the edge. Where are all these empty cells where the bees are, it looks like they're climbing into them essentially. You have to have like one cell per bee?
No. So, like here, there are bees, well, let's see, I just saw it on the screen there. There's some that were sticking their heads in there checking the cells.
So in the winter,
There's a butt right there and it's down there. But in the wintertime, what you're reading the book or having described to you, that cluster in the wintertime, all the bees move close together and vibrate their wings to try to maintain that heat. Well, it doesn't do them near as much good if they just were to stay in between the frames. Once they eat the honey out of the cells, there's dead space there. So they literally move their bodies into some of those cells so they can be in this really packed environment and maintain all that heat. And the bees that are in those cells are actually warming the frames up, the material themselves, so that the honey that's on the outside of that cluster is warm enough to be liquid, and they can peel back the cappings and move, either this way or that way or whatever, and go on to the next liquid honey and keep consuming it. And they don't just stay in the cells. They'll be there for a while, but especially if there was honey in there, they'll drink some of it down. They'll back out, and then they turn their head to the bee next to them, and through trophallaxis, mouth to mouth, they'll just spread that, they'll feed the bee next to them, and then they'll put their head back in there to drink some more. The bee that got fed turns around and shares some of it with another bee, and that's some of that process you're thinking of there. They don't purposely put themselves in the cells just for their bunk beds. It's just filling up space there. Any other questions? All right.
cool. Thanks, Jason. All right, management for honey pollination, honey production and pollination. Let's talk about nectar flow. I'm still learning a lot of this. I really wish I could say I can identify when a nectar flow is happening or when I think it's about to happen. I haven't gotten that much into our flowers and everything and what happens when. I know some basic things. Early spring resources, we'll talk about that. Usually it's dandelions. We've mentioned this before. When you get a dandelion bloom,
That's both a nectar source and a pollen source. That's kind of like that finish line for winter. Hopefully, we're there, and if you're feeding, that's an indication that maybe at that point your bees may begin to pick up the natural food that's out there for them and may begin to ignore the feed you're giving them, which is a good thing. Sources, all floral sources, right? And we're going to go through some slides here of some common things here and just in nature, what's out there. We've hit this a few times. The bees are going to find the biggest resource they can, and they're going to do their very best to exploit it. And then they're going to move on to the next thing. So if you have an area you want your bees to go, and you've got maybe a yard and a nice garden, and you planted something special for them, they will go there, but that's not probably going to be their main feed. They're going to move around quite a bit. You may have something nice there for them, but a half a mile away, there may be some clover blooming, or there may be a hardwood that's in bloom, or a fruit tree, or an orchard that's in bloom, and they're gonna find the best thing they can do, and they're gonna exploit it. And yeah, we supplement the feed that's there if it's needed, and then when the nectar source is available, typically the bees are gonna prefer what nature has for them over what we have for them. That's great. May 14th picture. I love this. Again, that's kind of our finish line coming out of your first winter. Stress all year, my bee's alive, and you get there, and if you've made it that far, you're probably in good shape. Do we have anybody here that's a botanist that really knows, can identify plants? Because I'm not, but
Those are those purple trees all over the place, the red buds.
Red buds.
The bees do love them.
I think that's even earlier in May when the picture was taken. I can identify a black locust. I have some hives that are near a timbered area out at the camp, Jason, and there must be some black locust trees out there because several springs I'll put my honey supers on this hive early or early for me, and the first few frames where I can see they've put some honey or nectar up into this. I think black locust is kind of a clearer honey. Yeah, it's a very light honey, good tasting.
Problem with black locust, it's twofold. If it comes into bloom, it's just for a short period of time, but it can overwhelm your hives because the bees will bring in so much nectar that you'll check them on Monday and you'll come back on Friday and they're already completely honey bound and packed in there and stuff because they brought it in that quick. They can fill honey supers in like 2-3 days off of black locust. The second part of it is 9 times out of 10 when black locust blooms, it rains on you and washes all the nectar away and did you no good because it's in that early springtime and it's a type of flower that just doesn't like rain on it for retaining its nectar. So
Makes a tasty honey though.
it does.
Whenever you get some of that, and again, I harvest my honey differently. I don't push it all together at the end of the year. I pick frames out throughout the year. When I pick some of those out, I keep that separate from everything else. It has a unique flavor, taste, and flavor, smell, and color. Yellow sweet clover. This is all over the place in Iowa. Some people will sow this into a prairie land or something, and the bees will do really, really well on that. And again, this is a June picture, so we're ending spring here and then getting close to summer. Dutch clover, same thing. You about can't find a place that doesn't have Dutch clover in Iowa. It's unless someone's spraying to get rid of it. It's everywhere. Little white flowerets, my bees are all over that.
It's really good to naturalize right into your yard, whether you're in town or have an acreage out in the country there. It only grows about 4 inches tall, and you can mow it just like you can a regular yard.
So I have a couple of acres at home, and so I don't mow it all at the same time. So I'll mow maybe a third of it, and then maybe a few days later mow the next third. Well, by then that first third I mowed, I've got clover that's reblooming again there for me. I don't know if that does my bees any good or not, but I feel good about it, so that's what I do. Alfalfa. Here's what I know about alfalfa. and Jason, keep me in check on this one. So alfalfa is best for the farmer if it is cut just before it blooms, right? If you have farmers here that can fix me on this, I think that's the most efficient for them. But if you have hundreds of acres of alfalfa and weather prevents you from cutting that aggressively or cutting it right before it blooms, it's a fantastic forage for bees. And so, again, especially kind of like my mowing the yard thing, if there's always something that's in bloom around, it's not all, you can't cut it all at the same time necessarily. The bees are going to find the nectar source out of it, and it makes a pretty good batch of honey.
Supposedly it's slightly more nutritious for livestock if it's cut before the bloom, and you can get 3 harvests out of a season if you're cutting it before the bloom, as opposed to 2 if you let it bloom and then cut it.
Right. I had one other farmer tell me that there's a time of year after which they don't cut their alfalfa because they want it to come back up on its own. If you cut it and too short or too late and then get cold weather, you can kill it. So not bad if it'll bloom late, if they've got their cuttings and they're done. But we have a late a summer that goes long or a fall that stays warm for us. It's out there for that too. I do not know what this is. I don't know if this is more of a backyard plant or...
It's a garden plant. That would be something that somebody would be putting in their flower garden type stuff. I don't know anybody that seeds that for wildflowers growing out on their CRP land or whatever.
You know what, I have some.
But bees do smack the heck out of it at garden centers and at people's backyards. They love that salvia.
Salvia.
It is a wildflower in Montana.
Is it a wildflower in Montana?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so changing gears a little bit, queenless colonies. How do you know if you're queenless? I'm going to play this back into my recommendation of keeping notes on your hive if you can. If you go into your hive, you inspect, didn't see the queen, didn't see eggs, but I'm a new beekeeper, so I'm not sure if that means I'm in super trouble or if I'm not used to seeing things yet. You put it away, you come back 10 days later, look again, I didn't see the queen, now I'm not seeing eggs, I'm not seeing the things the queen would do. Call for help, right? At that point you need someone to guide you a bit. If you're queenless, so remember the cycle for young bees is 21 days, right? From the egg laid for workers to emergence is 21 days. Well, if you inspect twice in those 21 days, you should be seeing stages of young that whole time. If you get into your hive and there's no brood, there's no eggs, can't find the queen, all you're seeing is pollen and nectar and probably some fussy bees, you've got a problem. And you have to do something about it or that queen, that colony's not gonna make it. You can buy a queen. If you have the resources to do it, if you still have eggs in there that are young or very, very young larvae, you can let them attempt to make a queen. I do that, but I'm also babysitting that hive. I'm in there probably more than I should be to see are they drawing out queen cells? Are they going to even try? And if they're not, that egg / young larva, 5 days time maybe, and I'm kind of out of luck on resources. Am I close to that? Yeah. Yes.
So if you have 2 hives colonies, and you got a good queen in the other one, and you know where she is,
Yep.
and she's laid new young brood,
Mm-hmm.
can you take that queen, put it in the new hive, and then the other hive make a queen?
Ask me your question again because I jumped ahead of you.
Okay, so you got colony A, and
Uh-huh.
they don't have a good queen.
Right.
She's gone. She's queenless.
They're in trouble.
Quality B, hive B, you've got a really good brew in there, and you got a good queen.
Mhm.
Can you take her,
The
put
queen.
her in A, take the queen and put her in A that didn't have a queen, and B, make a new queen?
There's risks to that.
Okay.
There's better options. There's
Okay.
better options. So I wouldn't take my queen right hive and make it not queen right. I
Okay.
wouldn't take her. But what I would do is I would find a frame that has brand new eggs or very, very young larvae and not my queen. And I would probably even keep the nurse bees on there, the bees that don't fly off when you raise that frame. And I would give that to hive bee. And then, again, watch them, right? See that they, make sure you don't move your queen. So healthy hive is fine. You've just stolen some resources from them, and get used to that as a beekeeper. That's a fantastic tactic. But you've given them a frame that they can work with, maybe even mark that frame. Hey, I moved this frame, put a little mark on it or something, so that's the one you moved. Give it a few days, take a peek in there and see if they are doing anything with those eggs. If they know they're queenless, they should take those eggs and begin to draw out numerous queen cells.
And make it easy on the hive and put that frame in the center of your brood nest, not on the outside of it.
Yep. That is beekeeping, right? That's what you do. There's a whole lot of balancing. If you have multiple hives and can do it, absolutely do that. The hive that you took that frame from, back your frames back together, and whatever you're likely to take a frame out of the hive that wasn't doing well, put it probably on the end or something, but keep your brood nest from your donor hive, your good hive, kind of put together, and that queen she'll be fine. You haven't damaged that hive, and you give the other hive a chance. Yeah, absolutely. What else do we need to hit here, Jason? Making a queen, basically we talked about that. Buying a queen, why not? There's a difference, right? If you buy a queen, you buy a mated queen, right away your queen is going to begin to produce young and give that hive that population boost it needs, hopefully without missing too much downtime.
Yeah, it'll be 3 days before she's out of the cage, and then sometimes just because of the shutting down her laying due to being plucked out, packaged, mailed to you, and then the 3 days of downtime in the cage. Sometimes it's 3-4 days after she releases or is released before she starts popping eggs out. So don't picture that day 4, I don't see eggs, what's wrong? Give her a little more time, but you're mitigating then the hive having 16 days for making a new queen, plus then the time for her to go and get mated and then decide to start laying there. You might have 3 weeks of downtime, and instead you just gave yourself 5 or 6 days of downtime by just buying a queen. Plus, you don't have to worry about that queen getting ate by a bird on her mating flight.
Right, there's risk. So
Or dragonflies or any of the other things.
Right. Myself, because let's call it thrifty, I'm going to try to get my hive to make its own queen. But I know that in that I'm taking in risk that this may or may not work. And I'm also risking, my population is going to not be increasing for probably 3 weeks. That's 3 weeks times how many eggs she would have laid in a day. That population is going to be low. Now my goal, instead of maybe trying to get a honey harvest off that hive, is, okay, let's just get these guys ready for winter. Or I can spend the money and buy a queen and take away the majority of the risk. If I install her properly, we're off to the races. I might still get a honey crop there. Might be worth the $30 or $35 I spend on the queen. I'll probably get that much back in honey. There's not a right or wrong. It just is how you decide to work your bees. Yes?
If it's late enough in the year, would it be advisable to just combine B with A instead of trying to make B a viable hive?
You're going to have a hard time.
We wouldn't have enough time to manufacture resources.
Right, and you're going to probably have a hard time finding a well-mated queen at the end of the year unless other beekeepers are also consolidating and they have a spare queen. Well, if they're getting rid of a queen late in the year.
Yeah, be careful about buying late queens. Usually people are getting. Here's the thing: do you want a queen from a colony that was on the downhill slope that had to be combined with another? That basically is failing genetics there that you're buying off of somebody. If you're buying a queen late in the year, it should be coming from like Florida, Georgia, California, somewhere like that that's mating good viable queens right at that time, not somebody with a failing colony giving you then the genetics that were failing them. So
You also probably don't want to overpopulate a hive going into winter because that's a whole lot of mouths to feed, and the resources are what they are in that hive, plus what you decide to feed them. So it's kind of a cold thing, Do you let it try to make it through winter on its own and let it go if it doesn't, or do you bring that potential problem into a hive that's doing okay? Combining, we'll talk about combining when we in a few weeks here, we talk about winterization and that kind of thing. But again, there's not a right or wrong, but there's some things you think about, and it comes down to how you want to keep bees. I had a few this year that I could have either left in single boxes because I started them really late, or I could have combined them with a hive that was already in great shape. I left mine in singles. None of them made it.
No, I was just thinking more of one that was queenless, not one,
Queenless.
not two that were established, but one that was queenless, that you could actually salvage the worker bees by combining.
You can, but if the hive you're thinking of combining it with is already in really good shape and doesn't need the population boost,
Yeah, you might be just taking, that poor colony may be infested with mites or some disease, and you're just now introducing that to your healthy hive.
yeah.
Just things you need to think about before you just cram the stuff together.
Yeah. And,
Maybe it'll help it out, maybe it's a boost for it, or maybe you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Right, sir.
You mentioned before, and it was a good point, I think, that when if you're gonna transfer a frame of good brood over to your problem hive,
Mhm.
you gotta make sure you don't have the queen on there. How easy is that to do for somebody who's not very experienced?
It can be done. You'll learn to find your queen,
Especially if she's marked.
especially if she's marked, right? And what I do, if I'm doing that, almost always I will know where my queen is. I'll find her, and I carry a queen clip with me. If I'm going to be in that hive doing a lot, like if I'm making splits off this hive, but I don't want to harm my queen, or I don't want to actually move her, I'll find her, a little clip I can put her into, leave her there, she's fine, and I can do whatever I want to with that hive now. I'm not going to crush her, I'm in good shape.
A clip, is it like a cage?
It's like it's like a little cage that workers can go in and out, but she's so big that she cannot. It's about that big. I don't think I have one with me. But they're not, it's possible to do. It's possible. You can also find your queen on a frame.
If you don't want to find the queen, or if you don't have a marked queen in your hive and you know you have problems locating her, rather than leaving all the nurse bees on that frame, just like that, all the bees fall off, or 95% of them fall off, and the few walking around you can just look at quickly, put that frame in there.
Yeah.
You just didn't take the nice nurse bees with it. But you didn't take your queen, for sure.
Yep. It's doable. It's doable. Lots of different techniques. All right, let's move on. Queen cells. Yay.
They always look like weird little peanuts off
They
your
do.
frames.
They do. They look like little peanuts hanging off the face of your frame. This one is still not capped. It's a little darker cone. Really doesn't matter, but you still have a worker going in and they're feeding. That's probably, that look told me that's probably within a day of being capped over. And this one is capped. Sometimes they're all on their own. Sometimes you'll have them, just 1, 2, 3 right next to each other, or slightly above or off to the side. I try to take advantage of these. If I have the equipment and I have the right time of the year and I find queen cells, I try to take advantage of that. I'll leave enough queen cells with that hive to where they can make their queen. But I've always got 3 or 4 or 5 frame nukes around that nothing's going on with those yet, and I'll take the chance and see if I can't make a split off of that or get multiple queens off of that if I can.
Yeah, if one of those nukes fails, if the queen gets ate by a dragonfly or whatever like that, he can just recombine the nuke back into the hive there.
Yep.
And he's not wasted anything. But if he gets a viable queen off of it, he can either sell the queen to another beekeeper, or he's just got another hive that's going to grow up throughout the year and go into next season.
I keep, I should mention this, although it's not first year stuff necessarily, second year, third year. I keep a series of nukes around, whether they're splits I've made or swarms I've caught, solely for the purpose of if I lose a queen or if I hurt a queen, I've got a queen right there that I can introduce to this hive. Again, and that keeps me from having to go through that 20 some day loss of time. Now, through the year, I may or may not ever use those. Or if I have a hive that's fallen behind, the queen's okay, but something happened and maybe they reacted poorly to a mite treatment I put on them and they're just behind, but I got this nuke that's got a couple good frames of brood in it, I will make sure my queen isn't on those frames of brood, and I will give that to this hive to boost their population and help them to get caught up. This 5-frame nuke I've just robbed from, they get a full 5 frames again, and now I'm not worried about that thing swarming on me. She has more, she's still a toolbox for me if I need it. I got a queen, I got brood, I've got whatever I need. If I need a honey frame in there, I could pull one out and put it into a hive.
You can keep them in that nuke you can keep for however long, as long as
Yeah.
it doesn't swarm.
Yep, pull this out real quick. It takes a little more effort. I'll get that out of the way in a minute, Jason. It takes a little more effort and babysitting, but I can keep bees in this for a long, long time. But they are gonna, if I have a good queen and I have a good population of bees, they are gonna outgrow that pretty soon. But I'm gonna take a look at this probably every 10 or 14 days, and I'm inspecting whatever else I have in that yard and see how they're doing. And, well, what if they feel too crowded and they get the urge to swarm? What are they going to do? They're going to make queen cells for me. I'm going to make hives out of those, right? I'm going to take those and I'm going to make use of them. So if I keep them around.
Simple way to mitigate that, if you want to keep your bees in the nuke there, is when you're doing your inspections, when they get all those frames packed out and stuff, just take like 2 of the frames out of that, leave them with 3 with the queen still in there. Just give them 2 brand new frames for them to start over. Those 2 frames that you take out of there, shake the bees into the nuke, but just go ahead and give them to one of your hives that you're actually trying to do either honey production or get it grown up big enough for wintertime or whatever. It becomes a frame builder for you at that point.
And that's valuable, right? When you have drawn comb, right? When you're in your second year, hopefully all your deep frames are drawn, and maybe even some of your medium, your super frames are drawn. Right away they can use them, right? They're not expending that energy to draw the wax. I've got a little engine here that'll just make wax on my frames for me, or it'll make me a queen, or it'll make me brood. I just take from it, manage it to help out my other hives.
Isn't the nuke making honey too, though? Is it like at the top of those frames have got honey and brood in the bottom or something?
It does, but I don't anyway super this in any way that I would take honey from it. It's making enough nectar and honey to take care of its own brood.
Sure.
And I really am not giving them room to do any more than that. So they are going to get the urge to swarm pretty quickly if I don't take from them, right? Take from them.
This is just some optional techniques
Yeah.
for you if you were trying to save your queen cells. If you guys don't plan on doing that at all and you're just going to let all your frames hatch out, just ignore everything we've said here
Yes.
about this nuke. We're getting sidetracked here, if anything. So
We are. All right, let's get back on track.
yeah, we kind of already covered queen right and
Yeah, we have.
signs of broodless.
Quick way to find your queen, if
She's
you
got the
catch it, she's surrounded, right? Everybody's facing her, they're grooming her, taking care of her. Oh yeah, the green dot too, that helps. We mentioned the brood, not brood, the comb. When you get streaks of drone brood in there, at some point it becomes problematic, and Jason's right, pull it out and replace it with something better.
So you maybe covered this before, the drone brood, is it normally on the outside and the workers are on the inside?
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually the queen will if you have a 10-frame box, on frames 2 and 9, she likes to lay drones predominantly on those. Frames 1 and 10 are usually honey for insulation purposes. They'll put the excess honey there and it gets too hot, too cold of shock for them to really lay much brood on those. And then your frames 3 through 7 is where she usually is laying most of the worker brood.
So why would you replace the queen? She's old, that happens, right? Especially commercial beekeepers, they need young, vibrant queens. Their livelihood depends on that hive be productive, which means the queen has to be productive. So some folks replace queens whether they practically need to or not. They will replace them every year or 2 years. And we've already talked about what it looks like when the queen's old and she's just not putting out workers like she needs to. Spotted brood pattern. If your hive was really, really mean, it's just unpleasant to work with, requeening is one way to correct that. You would need to find and eliminate your queen, and then introduce a new one, and then as her young begin to become the predominant population of that hive, its demeanor should change, hopefully for the better, and you'll get a hive that's a little easier to work with. And then disease or mite, part of the makeup of healthy bees, good bees from a good queen, is that they're going to hopefully have some resistance to disease and be able to take care of their own housekeeping. With a poor queen putting out poor bees, that ability reduces.
If you have multiple hives, sometimes you'll have, 4 out of your 5 hives are doing beautiful, and then hive number 5, you just see chalk brood, or you see some other problems when we get into the disease chapter, that hive just seems to be suffering from no matter what you do. Changing out the queen sometimes is the genetic twist that you do that just fixes that for you.
We've seen a picture just like this earlier today, but the sad thing about it is this looks like pretty much a new frame, right? We're not completely drawn across the bottom. Whoever had this frame, maybe not the whole hive, but at least this frame was introduced, and this wax was drawn, and not long after that, a queen that was really not doing well laid in it, and this is what happens to it. And again, you can't do a whole lot with that. Maybe stick it on the outside once it's done, replace your queen. Maybe take that frame and put it on out there on frame 1 or 10 and let them fill with honey. Is about really what it's good for. Young eggs and larvae. We've seen a picture of this already. Nice rice-looking eggs, single egg in each cell. And next to it, that's some 7, 8, 9 day old larva probably. Well, we're capped on the 8th day, right? I think we cap our young for workers, I think on day number 8.
Yeah, I kind of, in my head, I'm always like, this day of the week is when the queen is
Because
gets
queen reader.
I'm instead of counting days, I'm just always on the days of the week.
So there, I'll try to do it from memory. There's charts out there you can find, but basically you look like an egg for 2 to 3 days. Then you are a larva from day, let's call it 3 until 8, where you're uncapped. The workers at that time cap your cell on day 8, 9, somewhere like that. Again, this is worker brood.
It's amazing how quick those larvae really grow and then
Yeah.
get capped over.
They do. Once they're capped, that's all the food they're going to get, right? Because unless they take the capping off, which they typically don't do unless there's a problem, in that cell is everything that this is going to need to go through that and come out a young, pretty, cute little fuzzy worker bee, typically on day 21 for worker bees. Drones are 24 or 6. Queens are day 16 is when they emerge out. Nice pools. This is a little blurry on the screen, but all of these are swimming in a nice pool of royal jelly in there. And they just kind of eat themselves around in a circle, right? They just kind of go in a circle, and eat. They're fed what they need until they're capped over, and out come young worker bees. You want to look for this, by the way, whenever you are inspecting your hive. Finding eggs is great, usually pretty easy. This stuff shines against the sun, right? So if you're inspecting your hive and the sun is maybe at your back and you hold your frame up to look at it, you can get that to glisten a little bit. It's a little easier to find. Let's break here before we start talking about manipulating colonies. We're about an hour in. Stop 5 minutes or so, and then we'll rejoin. I didn't break the camera. All right, we'll get started again. Keep in mind, so we're gonna continue talking about really a few things that work together. You're managing your colonies for swarm prevention. Plays into managing your colonies for a honey crop. And if you're interested in doing pollination, we have a slide we'll hit on that later on about what you should be doing with your colonies if you're looking to pollinate a garden, or even on a larger scale someday, something much bigger. So let's talk about weak and strong colonies. You can unite colonies, which is you just put them together. If you have
And most of this is something you wouldn't want to do probably in spring or summer unless you have a reason just to reduce your colony count. There are things you can do to manipulate your colonies to try to give a colony that's struggling a little better chance and take advantage maybe of a colony that's doing really, really well, maybe so well that it's doing well enough it wants to swarm, and you want to slow that desire for that hive to swarm, to curb that. You can unite colonies. You can equalize, which effectively is colony A, colony B, colony A, struggling colony B is in really good shape. You can take resources out of a good colony, put them into colony that's struggling, and just swap frames. Again, know where your queen is. Make sure that you're not moving your queen from colony to colony.
And if you're just equalizing for honey, queens don't sit on honey frames, they're always down in the brood nest. So
Right.
it's pretty safe bet if you're taking cap frames of honey out, you don't even have to look for the queen usually.
Very rarely issue there. And like Jason said, if you want to be absolutely sure you're not moving your queen, shake your bees off of that frame into the hive they came from, take a look, and make sure you're not bringing over a really big, pretty queen, and then equalize. That's what we mean by equalizing. Basically, you're playing Robin Hood there, taking from the rich, giving to the poor. We talked earlier in the class a few weeks ago about switching locations. If I got, again, Hive A is doing great here, Hive B is not doing great, they're right next to each other. My workforce is great here, my workforce is not great here. If you were to switch locations of those hives in the middle of the day, your forage force is out at that point, and they're going to return not to the physical box they came from, but to the location they left from. So I've taken advantage of this a couple times, and it's not hard to do, especially if you're still in a single box. Just move them over, and your workforce will step back. Your workforce will come to the location they left from, which is the weaker hive, and they'll kind of self-equalize. Go back in a week or so and see if you have the desired effect, right? If the weaker hive now is doing a little bit better, their population's up, more resources are coming in, more pollen's coming in, queen's taking off. Questions about that? I'm not quite sure how you do that on a pallet. Just take the whole box off and put it back. I guess you could.
It's simple with a pallet because you take the two boxes apart and you just set them up on their ends so that the bees aren't squished down into the grass or whatever, and then you can go and grab the other two, just move it to position one where the first hive was at, and then I just pop the other one over.
Okay. Let's talk about swarming. It's some of my favorite, not favorite stuff. Favorite when I'm catching swarms, I love to do that. It's better than fishing for me, which is a lot. And losing them is no fun. Seeing a swarm of bees that I know came out of my hive go up to where I can't get them and eventually take off. Whatever hive they came from likely isn't going to produce me much for honey. My goal for that hive, if I know which one it is let's get these guys ready for winter, because probably not going to produce me much.
I mean, basically picture it as $100 bills flying through the air and you're trying to grab one up.
Hanging on trees, yeah, yep. I had quick story. Actually, we had a storm at one point a few years ago. I was only in my first or second year. I take a box like this out to where a tree had fallen. This is during a summer field day, I think 5 or 6 years ago, and I got called. I was the only beekeeper around, and I go to this tree, and there's a cluster of bees in this hive that was in this tree, and the trees exposed their hive. I pull in, I get my equipment out, and just then these guys take off. I'm like, no, I'm carrying my box up in the air. Like, come back. No, they're just gone. And it was late enough in the year. It would have been hard to keep that hive and to get ready for winter anyway. I think this was probably in July. Corn was tall enough. They went far enough out of my vision over the corn. There was no way I was going to catch them.
Had a similar thing happen to me just this last summer, but on a worse scale. Bees are up in the tree like 50 feet, and I had this whole pole arm out there and everything. Couldn't get it up high enough off of that, so we got the forklift out there, raised me up on a pallet up on the forklift. I was just within like 5 feet and couldn't get high enough, so
I had my father-in-law drop me back down on the forklift, and there was this extra carriage up top it's for picking up bee pallets and then having pincer arms that hold down on the top of it. So I climbed on top of the pincer arms, which was really dangerous at that point because there's no footing up there. And as he's raising me up, the swarm takes off. And I'm like, son of a gun, I just went through all of these steps to try to get these guys. Now I'm up in the air at full extension here, almost ready to fall off the machinery, and you guys take off on me.
Yeah. What can you do, right? So swarm calls are a thing, right? Whenever we'll get into it. These classes kind of go into a bee club that meets here on Thursdays throughout the bee season, and we talk about trying to be that beekeeper that gets called if there's a swarm. There's lists, and it's kind of who you know, kind of thing. Anyway, let's get back on track. So, if you think of a colony as an organism, not only does the queen constantly laying eggs, constantly reproduction is happening at the bee level, but this superorganism here, this colony, it also wants to multiply. It wants to take its genetics and spread them. So swarming is a very natural thing. As beekeepers, if you are inclined to want to keep your bees and raise a honey crop, there are things you can do to manipulate them so their desire to swarm is less. But you're kind of working against nature. It's trickery, right? It's things you can learn to do to try to keep this hive as populated as it can be, because that's your workforce that produces the honey, and managed well enough that they don't want to leave. And that's an art. I mean, there's no other thing to call that's an art form to do that. But if they swarm on you, it doesn't mean you're a bad beekeeper. It means they're following their natural instinct to swarm. That's what they do. If you can catch that swarm or catch somebody else's swarm, that's great.
Preferably somebody else.
Somebody else's swarm, right. It happens a lot. I start seeing swarming happen mid-April, honestly, if it's warm enough. Mid-April on through July, sometimes later. What's the saying, Jason? A swarm in May is worth a bale of hay. A swarm in July or June is the silver spoon. Swarm in July, let it fly. Let it go. Rain. Let's talk about rain just for a moment here. If you've been in a nectar flow in your hive population, we're talking multiple hives, multiple beekeepers in nature, everywhere. Brood rearing is happening, nectar flow is good, and then we get 5 days of rain because bees can't fly, they're cooped up. That I think tends to trigger their urge to swarm a bit. Or maybe they've had that urge, but they haven't been able to swarm because it's been raining, the weather's been bad, and then you get a good day of weather and it's on. It's on. There's all kinds of activity happening in the bee yard.
My belief is it's probably the latter of those
That's
two.
right, yeah.
Those 5 days, they that hive particular wanted to swarm, and maybe another one of yours wanted to swarm, and
Yeah.
they were waiting for that sunny day to happen, and then the queen took off.
And maybe even by then you've got virgin queen who's hatched. So virgin queen and mom, they're in the same place. They really, first opportunity, they want to go.
That's when you can have 2 or 3 clusters up in a tree, and really only one of them's the mated queen that's
Right.
taking off, and 2 of them are daughters that were virgins that are hatching out. It's just a big mess at that point, all happening. So
And that's a good point. Not all swarms have a mated queen. A hive can swarm and then swarm again right away with an unmated queen. That's not uncommon. So when you get a chance to catch a swarm, you'll want to, and you've hived it, right? You've caught it, you put it in one of these or one of these. You want to get back there, I would say 10 days tops, and see if you have eggs. See if you have the things that a mated queen should be doing. See if you have a queen, as she may have left or gotten harmed.
typically when I see that secondary swarm, it's usually when the queen's doing her orientation flight for the first time and the hive's just still in swarm gear or whatever. And if I just leave it alone, they come back to the box. Because the queen at some point is like, no, guys, I'm still a virgin queen. I was just trying to figure out where we live. And she comes back to the hive, and then so does the swarm.
Can you tell me where the guys are? That's what I'm out here for.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where the boys hang out.
Yeah. So again, this is probably not first year beekeeper stuff. This is probably second year, but we'll talk about this when we have our bee club that starts up, and it's an exciting time. To get a chance to tag along or to catch a swarm, it's a very memorable experience. We just talked about the swarming process, and we have earlier. Basically, the hive decides. There can be multiple reasons. Hey, it's time to do it. It's time to swarm. It's natural. It can be caused by congestion. It can be caused by help me out. What are the other reasons a colony may want to swarm?
Mainly congestion.
Congestion. Okay.
If it comes from any other reason, that'd be really bad disease load and other stuff where they're absconding, and it'll be like a swarm situation, but everybody basically leaves the hive at that point.
Not the same thing. So to prevent congestion, the thing to do is to have adequate room on that hive. Whenever when you're at that 7-10 rule, add your next box. Whenever you have your second box on and they're 7 frames or better, then your second box, put a super on.
If you guys see a swarm that small and you don't live near me, that probably came from a diseased hive that was finally absconding, because that is a tiny swarm there. The bee size there in the photo comparatively, we're only talking like that big for the swarm. They were probably absconding, and you probably don't want those bees. I say if you don't live by me, because every so often my little bitty mating nukes, they're only 3 frames and they're made of styrofoam and they're not that big. Every so often I don't keep up with them quite like I should, and they'll have too high of a population, and the queen and the mating nuke does take off. Well, that's actually a really full mating nuke for me, so I get these little grapefruit-sized clusters that come around my bee yard if I'm not harvesting queens on time.
And they won't necessarily, swarms in general won't necessarily go to like the biggest tree around. I mean, I've had little teeny tiny sapling trees that they'll go on and just bend the tree over. That's just terrible. I just walk up and put a box under, shake them in there, put the lid on, and come back at night. They should all be in there if I got the queen. Yes.
You don't want like big beehives, or you don't have somewhere to put that from. Like, what do you do? So you call somebody
Yep.
to help you with the swarm, because obviously you're not experienced with that.
Mhm.
Then what? I could choose to keep it and put it in another hive.
Yeah.
Or
So here's kind of how it goes. Now there's not like rules here, but if the swarm is on your property and you call me for help, I'm going to say, do you want to keep this or do you not want to keep this? And if you want to keep it, I'll help you get it. I've got enough equipment. I will probably even let's catch it in this and leave it in this until your equipment's ready, and then I'll help you put it in there. If you don't want it, call me. Call Jason. Well, I don't know about Jason. I don't know if you want swarm.
I'd re-queen it.
You requeen it. There are the beekeepers that would love, they have the equipment, or maybe they've had significant winter losses and they would love to have that. I don't sell swarms. I'll give them away, but I don't sell them. I'll help people catch them, and they can keep them. Often they let me keep them, and I'm looking to grow, so that helps me out. I also give a number that were given to me. I give away to other people. I've given them to youth that are in our program, and they had a problem with their bees, or I had one person who had their bees stolen one time, and I've got more than I need. I've got a couple that I've caught that are queen right. I know they're queen right. I'm using them as utility hives. Let me bring this to you. Just do it. So that's kind of the general. Again, it's not rules. It's more like etiquette for swarms. There's some people out there that are pretty competitive. There'll be a notice put out, hey, there's a swarm, who wants it? And everybody will already say, before they even know where it is, I'm on my way. You can't be on your way. You don't even know where it is, right? But they want them, right? So,
How long does it have? How long will a swarm stay like that? Just a matter of a few hours?
it could be a very short amount of time if their scouts have already found something, or they could be there for a couple of days. The beekeeper is the one that's in the hurry, right? The swarm, they're going to decide where to go. and they're gonna find a place. Whether it's a place they can winter in or not, they're gonna find a place. If they can't find a place, they're gonna stay there and create comb on that tree and have an open air hive, which isn't good in Iowa. That's not gonna make it through the winter. But when they find a place and they're sure about it, they're gonna go. And once they've decided that, unless you happen to have got that queen out of that hive or out of that swarm, that they're gonna go. So
If you see the swarm leave your own hive, you have more time to do your stuff, because it should be most of a day before they figure out a new home to move to, because they don't send the scouts out preemptive of the swarm. The swarm happens, they get on the tree, and then they start sending the scouts out, and then they have to do their whole honeybee democracy voting thing, and then they move to the new location. If somebody calls you up about a swarm, or you just walk out to your apiary and see one on a tree and you don't know how long it's been there, that's when you need to be in a panic that you might only have 15 minutes to catch the swarm at that point.
So I have a symptom I'd like to talk about. I had an off year this past year. I got sick, and so all year I was behind in my beekeeping all year. And I have a little teeny tiny pond out at my place, and at the corner of this pond there's this tree that might be 10 foot tall, and its trunk is only that big around. It's got leaves all over. It's real pretty, but I had 5 different swarms go to the same place on that same tree, which was about that high off the ground. It made it really, really easy for me to capture them and bring them back. At one time I had 3 nukes there, because within 5 days, I think I had 3 different swarms that went to that same place. I just put them all in a different box and left them there, and they weren't all queened mature queen swarms. Some of them had virgin queens in them, but they all went to the same place. So whenever I walk out to my bee yard in the afternoon, which I try to do almost every day if the weather's been good, I'm looking for where they might have gone. And sometimes I'm just strolling along and I'm like, oh look, there's a swarm just hanging there, just waiting for me to come get it. Okay, that's why I keep these with me, and I'll go get it and put it away.
Once the swarm leaves your box, though, they're considered kind of public bees, aren't they? Like if they go laying in your neighbor's yard, they call somebody to come get them there.
Yeah.
Right?
I live out in the country, so I don't have neighbors. but yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't know. It all comes down to etiquette, and beekeepers really are pretty nice group, pretty courteous group of people.
Not always.
I'm not going to argue with somebody over bees, though. I mean, I'm not going to do that.
One of the bad things that you'll encounter with swarm calls is sometimes a person will, a non-beekeeper will have a hive or a swarm show up at their place, and then they'll go ahead and they'll call 15 different people. They'll get on some Facebook group, they'll do this, they'll do that, and suddenly they've got all these tons of people that are coming to their place to get the swarm, and they've never been these non-beekeepers that are calling to get somebody to come get their swarm. They, for some reason, aren't courteous enough to basically say, oh, well, so-and-so's already on their way. I've showed up at swarm calls, and 3 other vehicles have shown up with me, and we're all sitting there going, what the heck? I drove, 45 minutes to get here to get this swarm, and you drove half an hour, and this other guy drove an hour to get here, and we're all here at the same time trying to get this swarm. Then you get kind of ticked off at that point, because you're burning gas, you're wasting your day. You may have been at your office working, and you ask the boss, hey, I need to take off because I got this swarm call. This is really important to me. And now you've just wasted your time because somebody else showed up 5 minutes before you and is already in the process walking up a ladder to get it. So be careful on those calls.
It can happen. And guys, these are small problems. These are,
It's not a small problem when there's 4 of you and you're all angry.
but maybe know that you might not be the only one against. I want to grow my operation too, I really do, but it's not worth arguing, in my opinion, not worth arguing over. All right, early signs of swarming. So if we have a mild winter, if we were to have a mild winter, especially end of winter is mild, queen's going to kick it into gear a little earlier. If we get early natural forage, early pollen, natural pollen coming into the hive, that's going to kick that queen into gear. Her population is going to go up before we maybe would expect it. Mild winter, early spring. We already mentioned old queen, right? If the queen's just not quite doing well, they're going to try to instead of superseding her, they may kick them into swarm mode as well, where, again, most of your bees. your
This is
mature
more
bees-
Mother Nature kicking in, because again, that's the bee's natural tendency to perpetuate their species. So your 2, 3, 4-year-old queens are going to be prone to trying to lay in cups on the edges of the frames that normally are just emergency queen cups. Well, she's going to want to lay in those because she wants to swarm. You know, Mother Nature's knocking on the door with her, and her biological clock's ticking, and she's like wanting to actually produce a swarm.
So these here, if I'm seeing them right, those look like they're off the frame of it, but they look like queen cups.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the workers will make a larger cell effectively that's not in with the frame, it's off the frame and usually pointed down. And those are either practice for them to practice making them, or a queen could lay in there, and if the queen lays a fertilized egg in there, they can draw it out, make a new queen. I have always wondered if workers move around eggs. Like, would they move an egg into a queen cell?
I haven't ever read any study on that where that's been conclusive. I think it's another one of those old wives' tales
Yeah.
about moving eggs and stuff. I will say, breed-wise, if any of you are getting Russian bees, their genetics or their breed just loves to make queen cups generally. You'll look at them and there's no egg in them, no food in them or anything like that. You can squash 15 of those queen cups that are just on the bottoms of frames. It's emergency queen cups that they're putting there if they need them. You can squish those 15 cups, come back the next day and they've built back 5 of them. Come back the next day and they've built another 5 of them. You cut all of those out, you come back a week later, and son of a gun, there's 15 of them in there again. They just, the breed of bee always keeps some prepped queen cups, but they're always empty until they actually get into a swarm situation. It's just a trait of the Russian bees.
So how do you know they're empty?
You simply look inside of them,
Yeah.
and they'll be perfectly clean, no egg, no larva in them, but they love on the bottom of the frames to just keep building some of these prepped cups in case they get into a swarm situation, and in case they get cramped on space, then the queen has those cups she can move right down there and lay in them.
If you want queens, could the beekeeper move an egg into a queen cup, and would they feed it royal jelly and make a queen? Or they only
You wouldn't want to move an egg, you damage it because they're attached when the queen lays it. A little portion, it's too fragile. But the moment that, you could go through there and graft young larvae just like any queen breeder is doing and deposit it in those cells if you wanted to, and they would probably, because of the vertical nature of it, start feeding it royal jelly and turn it into a queen. That's one of the things, is the vertical nature of those cups facing down stimulates the bees to think, oh, these are supposed to be queens down here, and just kick that into gear. That's why when I'm manually grafting queens, all of my manual grafts are all facing down. It just makes the bees pay attention to them for
What do you
queen.
mean by manually grafting? Moving a queen cup?
I literally have tools where I go pick up very young larvae and I put them into little plastic cups that I attach to frames, and they all point down. I make a hive queenless, and I prep bars and I put them in a queenless hive, and they will take all of those and form those into queen cells
With a synthetic queen cup that you got?
with a synthetic queen cup. I can also take little wooden dowel rods of the appropriate size, dip them in wax several times to build up a coating, and pull little wax cups off of there and mount them onto bars naturally and graft into those. It's just more labor intensive, so I'd rather just use the plastic cups that cost me like a penny a piece and just go off of that.
Over there, Jason, you're breeding in a week, or in a cycle. How many queens are you, Russian queens are you producing?
I have 550 mating nukes that I split into 2 cycles per month, so I don't have to go through all 550 in one day.
Yeah.
I overlap my mating cycles, so every Sunday I'm going through 250 of them at a time.
A lot of queens. A lot of
Now, not everyone successfully produces a queen. Some of my queen cells, don't hatch because they get chilled or I am too rough and bump them around. Most of them do hatch, but then again, I've got 550 mating nukes out in the same yard. Sometime a queen will fly into the wrong one and they attack her, or she gets ate by a dragonfly, a blue jay, a cardinal, whatever bald-faced hornet out there, and she doesn't make it back. So I go through there, and a portion of them don't have queens in them at that point, but I just recycle and start it all over again.
So this is probably a crazy, because I don't know question.
Right, we're getting off of learning,
So-
beginning beekeeping stuff and getting to the commercial side, but
You've got these queen cups,
Uh-huh.
and the first sister queen comes out, or bee or whatever. Why didn't you kill the rest of them?
oh, okay. I'm doing these synthetic grafts, and I will have 90 grafts in a single hive, and because I set them up all perfect, the hive will try to make me 90 queens. Naturally, they just go anywhere from 15 to 45 queens on their own they would do, but I try and make each hive make me 90 queens at a time. The moment they're capped, I harvest them all, and I put them in an incubator, and I put them in closed containers, so even if one hatched early, she doesn't go kill her own sisters.
Okay.
And then on the day that they're supposed to be hatching, I'm putting them all in their own individual home, so I get the most successful hatchings I can.
Because I was thinking they should all be dead.
Yeah, when you get into breeding of any livestock, there's a lot of manipulation that you do. So
Well, and here's how I tie it together, right? Jason, as a queen breeder, is manipulating a natural process and taking advantage of it. Honey management is manipulating what the bees naturally want to do to your advantage so that you can have a honey crop, or so that you
Or a
can
better
have
crop.
pollination. Yeah. Yep, a better honey crop, right? What we have here is a crowded hive. 2 deeps, at least 1 super than the picture leaves. If you're seeing that, it's either really, really hot outside, and they're just trying to cool that hive, like we talked about earlier, or you may be overpopulated. There's a lot of bees down here.
yeah, you get into August and it gets super, super hot. It's over 100-degree day and 100% humidity. Sometimes the best way for the bees to cool down the hive is just a big chunk of the population to get out of the room and just leave some of the bees in there that were the nurse bees for ventilation. But you get into a gymnasium that your kids are playing some sport or whatever, and you first walk into the gym and you're wearing your coat, and by the end of their game, everybody's just sweating their butts off because the gym was packed and all your body heat's in there. Beehives the same way. Clear out a bunch of the population in August, and the hive can manage its temperature better.
If you've seen this earlier in the year, it's not hot, you would want to, and again, we can only see, I think there's a lid, so only 1 super here, but you want to take a look and make sure they have room, and if you have drawn comb, probably put a second super on, which would be a 4th box anyway, and give them something to do. Give them something to do, so they're not just outside the hive and not doing well. Alrighty. Checking for swarm cells. So at this point, the beekeepers like tip the box up and is looking at the bottom of the box to see swarm cells. Again, knowing what you have. Whether you do something with those swarm cells you see or not, as in reproduce more hives, make splits, or just know what your situation is. Swarm cells typically are on the bottom of the frames, so tipping your box up will give you a pretty good look at them.
And when you showed the video earlier, that was really
Yeah, this is what was going on. Swarms leaving the parent hive. Some things you can do. Cutting queen cells, I'm not a fan of that. If I had queen cells, I'm going to do something with them. I'm going to try to expand.
And that doesn't usually work. That usually just puts you in a hopelessly queenless state. But
Right. I mean, if you have 10 queen cells and you cut it down to 8, you cut out 8, cut it down to 2, and if the 2 you left aren't any good, you create a real problem.
yeah. So cutting queen cells here, it may work 25% of the time. And basically what you're doing is you see all these queen cells that you're like, oh shoot, I didn't get out here in time. I didn't give them enough space. They're planning on swarming and they've got these queen cells. Maybe a fourth of the time, if you go through there and cut every single one of those out of there and give them some space, you can head off that swarm leaving your hive. The other 3/4 of the time, your hive goes ahead and swarms anyhow, and then you have no queen to replace the one that took off. So you can cut queen cells, just it doesn't work very often.
I want to talk about reversing hive body. So this is not the same as what we have here, switching, right? Not doing this. Bees want to work upwards. And sometimes I've had this happen. I'll have a too deep situation, and there's not a whole lot going on in my bottom box, especially as we come into spring. They've taken all the resources out of it. They're up in the top box, but their desire is still to go up. I can reverse those 2 boxes.
Yeah, this is a springtime second year situation.
Yeah.
Not anything to worry about this year, but you're coming out of winter, and he's talking about switching the boxes.
Just reverse my deeps, especially if they're in the top and there's nothing going on in the bottom. But I'll look there first. Oh, there's nothing there, and they don't want to work down. They want to work up. I'll reverse the boxes. Now they have room to work up and use that space that they weren't doing anything with. And we've already talked about making splits. Good purpose for queen cells.
Switching the position of the 2 hives just simply is taking away a bunch of that crowded workforce that the overflowing hive had and giving it to the hive that isn't in a swarm situation type of thing.
Again, second year stuff, but making splits. Take a strong colony at the end of April. Again, this is all depending on it's seasonal, right? So can't do those splits if you have a cold April. Not a good idea. Early spring, let's call it that. Take a look at what you have for capped brood or for sealed brood. You'll want 2 or 3 good frames of brood with the nurse bees that are there. And again, there's multiple ways to do a split, but in general, put those and some resource frames that have some pollen or some honey in them into another box, or whether it's a 10 framer. I wouldn't recommend that. I like put them into 5. I like to keep them nice and cozy. And then you're going to introduce a queen if you want to make split the quick way.
Or you can just do a walk-away split where you just
Let them.
make one queenless, and basically you just split the 2 boxes apart. Obviously the queen's in one and not in the other.
Right.
And the one that doesn't have a queen, then they're like, oh, crud, we don't have a queen. Let's go ahead and take some of these young larvae and turn them into queen cells.
Yep. So move to a location at least 3 miles away, or leave in the same apiary. I do a lot of my splits in the same apiary. I might spread them out a bit so they're not right next to each other. I've got locations that are 3 miles away, and sometimes I do that too because that's where I want bees to be, but not necessarily to try to give the split a better chance to succeed. It's just because I want where I want bees to be.
Yeah, your hobbyist or your sideliner tends to say they need to move their bees away a long ways, but your commercial beekeeper is going to argue the heck out of that and say, well, I make splits all the time in the same yard, and I make splits all the time in the same yard, and I simply just move them a few feet away and face them a different direction, and I have no problems.
Yep. Second bullet is, we talked about you can drop a new queen in there to a queenless split. Okay, I say drop, but this is probably not the time to do your grenade method. This is where you want to properly introduce a queen with a cage and the candy.
It's not a problem. You can't do the grenade method. You
Yeah.
need the 3-day delayed release with
Yep.
doing
Let
that.
them get used to her.
Because if you did the hand grenade, they'd kill her?
Probably.
Yeah, because they aren't used to her pheromone scent. The hive smells like the old queen that the frames came from, and it's embedded with that scent for a period of time. So you put the new queen in there, and from her mandibular glands, she is spreading something called queen substance, which is her own scent. And every nurse bee that goes up to feed her pulls away some of that scent, and then they feed other bees. They're passing it around. It gets on the wax, and the hive starts smelling like her. And over the course of, well, I guess it depends on how big the hive is, because the smaller the hive, the quicker it is to spread her scent around. But no matter what, queen candy is usually dialed out for 3 days delayed release, so that if you had a 2-deep box with a honey super on it, there's enough time to spread all that scent through that.
Yep. You really don't want to buy a $30-some queen and you drop her in and then they're on her and she's gone.
And I've known first-year beekeepers do that. They would buy a queen, and they just tried to do a direct release in there because somebody told them they could. And then they're talking at some bee meeting about this, and I'm like, what? What? How? You can't do that. It's going to immediately ball the queen. That is a foreign queen to them. So
When you make a split, you give them some food, right? Give them some pollen, nectar, so resources, right? That's the general term for food in a split. Give them some resources, and that's going to encourage them to begin rearing brood, because that split now has a lot of work to do. Typically, when I make a split, when I make splits here in late April or early May, I'm not counting on those new splits to produce me a honey crop. If they do, that's great, fantastic. I'll take genetics that'll go from a box like this to producing me any amount of honey, but I'm not counting on that. I'm counting on that hive to get itself ready for winter and be a producer for me the next year. But the sooner you can get that hive to ramp up, the better chance you have. Some basics here we've talked about. 7-10 rule on a good nectar flow, a medium box, which is this guy right here, that can get filled in just a few days, especially if you already have drawn comb to where they don't have to build the wax first, they just have to fill it. They'll go to town. Second year stuff, but whenever if you have a good hive and you're going into your nectar flow in the spring and it's time to super that hive, which means you know your queen right. You're probably not going to spend a whole lot of time down in the first 2 boxes after you super your hive unless you detect a problem. If I have the equipment, I put 2 supers on them. And in those 2 supers are going to be mostly drawn frames and probably some frames that need to be drawn. Drawn frames in the middle, frames that need to be drawn either checkered in or maybe on the outside, so that I've given them room. They're going to be fine until I can come back around and check their progress. Again, healthy hive, one I know is good. That's kind of like we're ready, honey production time. Let's see how you do.
How many supers can you put on one hive?
How tall are you?
Is there a height limit? Or
no, there's no height limit. Typically in Iowa, for our nectar flows and stuff, if you just had ungodly resources in your area, you might get 5 or 6 honey supers if you really had an awesome year. I don't usually see people ever go over 6 honey supers on a hive.
If they fill one up, can you just take it off and put an empty one back in its place?
You sure can. You can take that full one off, go extract it, and throw it back on the hive, or give them a brand new box to start building on. You don't have to have 6 extra boxes for every hive sitting around. You can have just 2, and if they did have a good year, when they fill that out, go extract it, go give it back to them.
To add on to that, you can say you're only your first super on that hive. You can look in there and go, okay, I have 9 or 10 frames in this super. 3 of them are completely capped and ready to go. I'll take those and extract those and give them, put the frames they're working on together, or checker in new frames, put it back, and now they've got 3 new frames to work on for me, and I can take these and either extract them or store them for later.
Bullet number 3 is pretty important.
Yeah, so, and you gotta stay ahead of the bees, guys, or they'll backfill the brood area. So if they begin putting nectar in the area where the queen is wanting to lay eggs, and her ability to lay is less, that is gonna really trigger their desire to swarm. Because there's less room, queen's like, I got nothing to do, she's dying to lay eggs here and I can't. That's gonna incline that hive to want to swarm if they fill that brood area too much.
Additionally, that just kills your honey production for that year.
Yeah.
Because once they get, let's say they took an entire deep and they fill it up with honey there, and you're down to just 1 deep that the queen can lay in, even if they swarm and produce a new queen, they still have now 10 frames of honey in their way for the new queen to try to lay eggs in. She's only producing half as many bees that can go out and collect honey and put honey in your honey supers. You're going to get a fraction of the resources brought in you normally would have, and you'll just get a tiny crop that year off that hive. So stay ahead of it.
It'll be great for winter. Like if you can have a
you're already prepped for winter.
Full of honey, in September. That's great. That's fantastic. But you don't want that in May or June. Let's talk real quick about how many frames in a super. When you have undrawn brand new equipment, brand new frames, put all 10 frames in your super and let them draw it out. You need that so they'll make good straight comb for you. Your second year, when you have drawn frames, hopefully you have drawn frames, you can just put 9 frames equally spaced in your super, and you can get a little more honey out of that than if you have that 10th frame in there. You've got space between the frames. These are not supers, actually here, these are. You've got space between your frames. I'll take one out. You can equalize this out a bit so that you have space between the frames, and the bees will draw your wax out and put more honey in the cells of each frame. If you have it spaced out, something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to uncap.
Yep, easier to work with. Good practice. Again, this is second year stuff, but you can put all 10 in, but I like having frames that don't necessarily have a home. So when I go to cherry pick 2 or 3 frames out of a hive that are done, I can put these right in. I've got extra frames.
And that term uncapping, that just means at extraction time, cutting the wax capping off of those honey frames so you can then spin the honey out of them. There you go.
Ta-da! There's a 9 frame example with the what? 3, close enough. 9 frames spaced. Actually, that's less than that. That's 8.
5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8 frames in a 10 frame box,
Yeah.
but they're really fat.
Yep. This is the first time you see this, right? You've got honey produced. It's all nice white cappings over. It's just gorgeous. That means you're on your way, right? You're on your way to a crop, and you've had some success as a beekeeper. Yeah, just another really pretty picture of bees. So, as they're putting honey away into these frames, they're going to fan their wings and dry it down to where they think it's ready to cap over, and they put just this little skim of wax over the top of it, which kind of seals it. If you take a good frame of honey that has been dried down, even if it's not capped over yet, you really can't shake a whole lot of moisture out of it if it's ready to be capped. If you can shake that frame and you're getting droplets of water, it's probably wet enough that all by itself, you don't want a lot of frames like that to extract, because that moisture will cause fermentation in your honey crop. You don't want that.
They sell a little tool that you can also sample the honey and put it on the tool, and it'll tell you the moisture content of it. It's called a hydrometer.
Got one? Yep.
You want it to be 18.6 or drier.
Less, yeah. Yep. We talked about a lot of this. You want to stay ahead of your bees. They need space, or they get overcrowded. That triggers a lot of things you don't want. Swarming and lack of workforce, because the queen has less room to lay. Always give them room to store more surplus honey. I know I lost honey crop this year.
There's a photo coming up here that shows that.
I know I lost honey crop this year. I went to some hives again. I was behind all year. I went to hives and I'd had 2 supers on them. I did that right, but I come back maybe 3 or 4 weeks later. Every frame is completely full. They're full, and they're not done producing. They're just putting it down here in the root area where I don't want to. If I'd have put a 3rd super on there, either right away, when I first put the first 2 on, or had made it back, just throw a super on and I'm done, in and out, I would have gotten more honey out of that hive. Yeah, pretty good picture here. I think we've seen this in an earlier.
Yeah, when we were talking about stable foundations and then talking about the colony growth. Something here, this is Doyle's apiary, and something that Doyle loves to do during his honey crop year. When the hives start growing up here, he likes to go ahead and put some, basically they're just little shims that have an extra entrance there. So instead of the worker bees coming and having to go to the entrance of the hive, drop off their honey load, and the worker bees go up in the colony and deposit down in the honey supers, he's giving them extra doorways that they can just go ahead and skip up to the honey supers. He seems to have a lot of luck doing that.
He likes doing it. There's a downside to that, and that your bees very well may make what we call burnt comb in that space, which is going to attach the box below and above kind of to each other. not the worst thing in the world, but it can make the boxes and frames stick to each other. You may have to work a little bit to get it off, but that burr comb in between, if that's just full of honey, that's a tasty snack too.
So what do you do if they do move down and start putting honey in the?
Give them space and hope they use it. You know, if they're down there, hopefully, well, okay, if
Once
I
the
have,
honey's capped over, they don't like to uncap it and move it. Sometimes if you feel like you're honey bound, if you feel like the queen doesn't have enough space down there, you may have to manually pull some of those frames out and give her either fresh drawn comb, or if you don't have that, just give some blank frames down there. Hope they build some comb on it if you're trying to free up space.
the idea is to keep her in a nest that she can keep laying in, even if you gotta pull frames of honey on either side of it out. They're typically gonna build honey from the outside in. That's what I've seen most of the time. And so hopefully the very center is where she's still laying. Expand that for her, give her more room in there by taking out frames of honey.
Is there any reason not to put extra supers on top at the beginning of the year?
Giving too much space can be counterproductive to your hive. They can chimney up through the center. They can have too much space to try to temperature regulate. It can be a great breeding ground for nasty little bugs getting in there and stuff like that. So too much space can be counterproductive for having it laid out the nice way for you to farm it and get the honey out of it.
But guess what I'm gonna do if I know I'm gonna be gone for 3 weeks and I have the equipment? I'm throwing everything I can on that hive and hoping they do okay.
Shame on you. You should not be gone on a 3-week vacation in the
middle of
spring.
Nectar Flow, I know. But if I can't help it and I got the equipment, right, I can deal, if I create a problem and I get back, I can maybe deal with the problem, but I really don't wanna lose a hive because they ran out of room, or lose a honey crop because I just decided not to put a third box on. I can fix problems. All right, what else do we have? Pollination. So, obviously honeybees are great pollinators. They like a variety of sources, so they're really good at spreading pollen around. The rule is about 1 hive per acre for pollination. I'm assuming this is like your garden variety Iowa pollination. I don't know how that goes for like commercial level pollination. The people that are raising almonds or have
Still about this,
orchards.
that I think this is actually for commercial pollination here, because they like to have 1 colony per acre of land, but they usually put them on like the outskirts of the farm and not all throughout it.
Yeah. So a lot of the same rules. If you're interested in this part of beekeeping, do some reading, do some good, solid, maybe not necessarily YouTube, some research on this. I have not kept bees for pollination. My garden does great. I know it's because I've got lots of bees in my area. But my focus has been on honey production and expansion is what I've been up to. So, I think we're there. Yeah, we're there. So chapter 6 is for next week, and we're actually done on time. Any questions before we wrap up tonight?
So, if your hive swarms, it doesn't mean it's dead.
No. Means you're getting a new queen, hopefully.
You get a new queen,
Yeah.
So you don't have
It's not the
to
end
do
of the world.
sleepover, is it?
Well, I mean, you probably lost your honey crop.
Well, yeah,
You probably lost your honey crop or the majority of
Right.
honey crop potential.
but it's not dead.
No. Maybe give it a little time and go in there and, again, I'm nosy, so I know I'm in more hives more. I really violate this, shouldn't be in your hive more than 10-day rule badly. I really do, especially the hives that I have at home. The hives that I don't have at home, I'm probably doing half decent there. But I'm gonna go in there and see, okay, they swarmed. Within a week, I'm gonna be in there to see what's happening, right? Are there queen cells that are,
You can tell the swarm.
yeah,
You didn't see them swarm.
yeah, I'm sure
You
that's
open
happening.
them up, oh yeah, well, I got plenty of bees in there,
Even if you do it right, eventually they're gonna swarm probably, right? How long, what's the longest you can reasonably expect to keep a hive from swarming?
There's a lot of theory and probably superstition around
The
that.
swarm lasts for at least 2 months and then some.
I don't know. I mean, if you keep giving them space or taking resources from them to make other splits to where they just never have the time to get overcrowded, I think you can manage your way into them not ever swarming
Really?
reasonably. I mean, I think you can. But then again, you're working against Mother Nature. That hive wants to spread its genetics, and swarming is how they do it. So if you manage it well to where that you're managing all the trigger conditions for them to swarm, and they swarm anyway, well, then you're kind of left with just a smaller hive, probably. I mean,
And if you don't want to get too big, right? If you say, I don't know,
and a big
5
hive.
hives is enough.
Oh.
I don't know how many is enough. Then, is there a mechanism to give bees away?
Oh, yeah. That's be part of a bee club, and there'll be people that'll take them. We probably didn't mention this part, but beekeeping is really addictive. I mean, once you start into this, you're like, oh, I need more. Yeah, I gotta have more of this.
I just wanted one hive years ago. And then it was like, oh, I got my hive through wintertime, and oh shoot, it's really growing here. Let's split it into 2 hives. And then 2 hives turned into 15 hives. And then that turned into my local bee club asking me to learn how to raise queens because they wanted my genetics and stuff. A few of the members did. And then that snowballed into me having a company, and I quit my day job at the financial place that I was working for, Salmon's Annuity Group. It was an investment firm. So I quit the job there, and now I'm a commercial queen producer. So, I mean, it snowballs on you.
It's a good problem to have if you get there, but there will be people that will help you with that problem. That will, maybe you don't want 5 hives at your property, that's enough, but you'd be willing to have more because you like beekeeping, but 5 at home was enough. There will be, probably can find people that would like to have a hive on their property that's yours. You know, and then you can negotiate who manages it, whose equipment is, and all that stuff. There are ways to handle that, certainly. Yes.
A couple questions. One is there sort of a standard deal you offer people to put bees on their property, like you promise them a jar of honey?
No, there is definitely no standard deal. Some people just want to help keep bees alive, and it'll be a completely free gig for you. Other people are wanting honey paid as rent to them, and other people are wanting cash. So it's all over the board. And some people think that their ground is worth gold for you to put bees on it. And they're like, oh, I want $150 per hive there. And you just laugh at them, and you go to their neighbor and you end up putting bees there for free.
And bees are trespassers, so they're going to the other guy's property anyway. I can tell you what mine is, because a lot of my hives are not on my property. I offer, wherever I have bees somewhere, I offer a quart of honey per hive, or for me, the wholesale equivalent, which is $15 per hive. So if I've got a pallet on somebody's property with 4 good hives there, that's either a gallon of honey or $60, and I'm happy to pay that. But for that, I want access to the property. I don't want to have to ask permission every time I go there. I'll tell them, hey, I'm going here, but I need to be in and out and do what a beekeeper needs to do, because I'm usually racing daylight when I'm out on a good day. So, and that's not standard, but I don't have very many people who turn me down on that.
My approach is usually I first start off with, do you want anything for me putting bees here? And then based on whatever they suggest right off the bat, versus how good of a place I think it is for the bees, I'll then negotiate with them. Like I said, some people think their place is worth $1 million type of situation, and I have to be realistic with them and say, well, I've got 15 other locations, and this is the most I pay anybody for that location, and then normally that puts more in a reality check with them. However, if the person is allowing me to put 20 pallets there and they're only expecting a honey bear, I'm perfectly happy with that situation too. And normally then it's like, oh, here's 3 honey bears, you know, and they're super happy because I'm overpaying them in their mind and stuff. So
You should have met us the March just before the pandemic, because we were gonna have somebody just come put the hive out. We'd been good to go, and we're gonna save the pollinators, and then COVID came.
I have one person that's like, well, I just want my grandkids when they come out here to be able to see the beehives and know the bees are there, and I know how to beekeep. Is it okay if I open them once in a while? And that's the only payment they want. I'm like, sure, as long as you know you're not stealing frames out of my hives and making splits on your own. I don't care if you go do a bee inspection on my hives.
That was my other question. How much trouble is there with rustling and vandalism?
The reason why nobody in Iowa realizes we have 4,000 to 5,000 beekeepers is because everybody hides their hives in Iowa. There's always nice thick woods or, river valleys and things like that. If you talk to our state legislation or anything, they don't even think honeybees exist in the state of Iowa, even though there's 5,000 beekeepers in the state of Iowa. Everybody just tries to hide their hives because you always hear about the couple stories throughout the state that happen in a single season of somebody's hives getting vandalized. If you put your bees out by a major roadway where there's a good population of people, there will be some teens that come out there and want to kick it over some night. So just all beekeepers hide their hives.
Yeah, pretty much. Good answer. Any other questions, guys? It's been a good class. Chapter 6 for next week, Product of the Hive. And I think we'll have